Patzer's Playground, episode 27. Okay, so I have the Russell Lima, which is this bishop b5 on move 3, bishop g7, normal move. Okay, c3. Okay, so what move does white intend to play here? Yeah, white intends to play d4. Okay. That much is obvious. So what should black do about it? So black can do one of two things. The more confrontational approach would be to play this move e5. The idea is to simply clamp on this d4 square. And here, white can actually play d4 anyway, involving a pawn sacrifice. The idea is that this bishop will come to f4 and put pressure on the dark squares, and this pawn will be difficult to hold. Or black can challenge the center with knight f6. So after knight f6, either rook e1 or e5. Then if, rook e1, castle, if e5, knight d5, and at least the pawn duo has been forced to move forward. But the move that black played in the game is not very good because it allows white to build a big center, and when white captures this knight, black often wants to recapture with this pawn to give this bishop scope. So moving this pawn is not a good idea. Okay, so white plays h3, knight f6, e5. So here I think knight d5 would be fine. The idea is this knight will often head back to c7 and then e6 and then help fight for control of d4. But the move that black played was okay too. He simply took, and so take. Okay, so what's white's threat? Yeah, so white's threatening to win the exchange or a pawn by taking twice on c6. Okay, so what should black do? So we should probably defend the knight. There's quite a few ways we can do it though. We can play queen to b6, we can play queen to c7, queen to d6, queen to d5, bishop to d7. So which of those look good? Well, the answer is almost any of them are fine. I would prefer to play either queen d6 or queen c7. Because, I mean, you're going to have your pawn structure ruined anyway. So, for example, if you play bishop d7, I can still, take on c6, and then if you take with the bishop, I take with the bishop, and then your pawn structure is ruined. But if my pawn structure is ruined, I'd prefer to keep more pieces on the board. So, that's why I don't like bishop d7, and I want to challenge this knight. So if I play queen b6, white can play something like a4, and then it's not clear that my queen is well posted on b6 because it can be hit with a knight a3 and knight ac4. But yeah, either queen d6, queen c7, or even queen d5 should be fine. And the point is, so say queen d6, and say take, and then bishop e2 or something. So the point is that it's true that black's pawns are quite weak. But if you notice, what does black have in compensation for the fact that his pawns are isolated? Yeah, he has some development. But yeah, the real key is that these files are opened. This D file and this B file. So it's going to be hard for white to develop this bishop because very soon black's going to play rook b8 and challenge this b pawn. And it's also going to be hard for white to get this d pawn out very far because black's going to be castling and playing rook d8. And this d pawn will be stuck on d3 probably, at which point black can play a move like bishop a6 and challenge this d pawn. So it's actually hard for white to develop his pieces. So black definitely has some good dynamism in his position to counteract the fact that his pawns are rather weak. So this is not something black should really fear. But okay, black instead played bishop d7. And so now the question is, how should white capture which piece should white capture and with which piece? So it turns out that with black's pawns isolated the way they are, white's going to want to prefer knights here. So white should probably play bishop takes c6. And then after b takes c6, play knight a3 with the point of bringing this knight to c4. So for example, castle, rook e1, queen c7, and knight a c4. And now notice that white has good squares for his knights. And this knight kind of helps control these light squares that might be a little bit weak, given the fact that white traded off his bishop, his light squared bishop. And white would be doing okay here. And also white shouldn't mind if black takes this way, because the resulting position with fewer pieces on the board means that the light squares that are slightly weakened due to this pawn structure the significance of the weakness of the light squares is a bit mitigated by the fact that black has no light squared bishop anymore. And also with exchanges, it kind of magnifies the weakness of these pawns. So again, white wouldn't be unhappy here either. But instead white played knight takes d7, trying to take the two bishops, but this is actually the wrong idea, because after queen takes d3, black is just completely fine here, because now his pawn structure won't be ruined, and you know the bishops aren't really doing anything spectacular in this position. Okay, so he chases the bishop with a6, bishop a4, b5, gaining some time, castle, always a good idea, bishop b3, attacking our pawn on c5. So queen d6, almost forced, but actually a good move. Queen e2. Okay. So we've completed our development as black. We've gotten out of the opening fairly unscathed. The question is, what should black do here? So this is actually a very important teaching moment in the game, because there are a lot of valid ideas. Okay. So it turns out that everyone in the chat is completely wrong, but it's good because this is what we want. So the point to notice in this position is that black's pieces are kind of well placed, and white's are a bit weird, particularly this guy, right? And this guy. So we want to take advantage of that. So moves like rook fd8 and rook ad8, you know, are fine, but they're not really getting to the heart of the matter, which is to try to create a weakness. And so a move like e5 is actually extremely anti-positional because this just blocks in all of our pieces. It makes this worse, it makes this worse, and makes this worse. So the right answer is actually to play this move b4. So what's the point of b4? Well, the idea is we're just threatening to win a pawn by playing knight d5 next move. And it turns out it's actually impossible to stop that because of white's laggard development. So the idea of this b4 move is to open up the scope for this bishop and to take advantage of the fact that these two pieces have not developed yet. So black has to kind of get it going while he can. Okay, so black starts with knight d5, and the difference is that now white has a resource. And the resource that white has is this knight d2 move. And the point is that now knight e4 is coming. So for example, if b4, knight e4, and now instead of winning a pawn, we're losing a pawn because of this fork. And notice that if we play b4 first, then this knight still defends the e4 square. So if we take, there's no knight e4, we just take on e4. So after take, knight d5 again just wins a pawn. Because if knight e4, now we have a very cute move, knight takes c3, which just wins a pawn. Because notice that if he takes our queen, we take his queen with check, and then we take his knight, and we're just up a piece. So he'd have to take our knight, and then we take back, and we're just up a pawn. So order matters. Knight d5 is a good idea, it's just executed in the wrong order. Okay, so knight d5, knight d2. Okay, so now we can't play b4 because of knight e4. So, that's okay. We're not lost. We're doing fine still. But what should black do now? Well, first of all, what's white's threat? I mean, I mentioned it already, but it's actually a threat, so... White's threatening to win a pawn with knight e4, right? Okay, so how do we combat that threat? So there's three things we can think about doing. We can either defend the square again, we can remove one of the attackers, or we can stop knight e4. So we can't really defend this square again. Our pieces aren't really coordinated enough to do that. So really the choice is between playing knight takes e4, or sorry, knight takes e3, and a move like f5. So the question is, which is correct? So you just have to be careful when you push pawns about the weaknesses that are created. So for example, by pushing f5, notice what squares you're weakening. You're weakening this square on e6, and you're weakening this square on e5. Because now you have no pawns that can really defend this square anymore. And also, you kind of made this pawn quasi-backward. I mean, it can go to e5, but it's going to need some help to get there, you know, from black's pieces. I mean, it does have that help currently, but it's something to kind of be on the lookout for. So the question is this move too weakening, or is it actually okay? And it turns out that in this particular position, this move is actually fine. Reason being is that black's pieces are actually better placed than white's, and also black has more space actually. So the fact that you're weakening these squares shouldn't have too much consequence. Because this pawn being quote unquote, backward, it's not really an issue because it's hard for, white to put a pawn on f4 or d4 or something to stop e5. So we're pretty much going to get e5 in no matter what. And if that's the case, then this move can't really be bad because we can kind of support it with rook fe8 or rook ae8. And by taking away the square e4 from white, we kind of take away his only main plan. So f5 is a move you should, kind of be wary of in thinking about weaknesses, but in this particular position, it's actually fine. If white had a pawn on d4, for example, and this pawn were on c4, then maybe it might be a little bit more of an issue because, okay, then if you play e5, then at the very least I can capture and free my bishop. But with this pawn kind of having a free reign to go to e5, this move f5 shouldn't be looked at as a weakening move. It's more of a preventative measure against knight e4. So f5 would have been correct. But black decided to take on e3. And the reason why this is more inaccurate is because what's better, this piece or this piece? Well, at the moment, I'd have to say it was the knight. I think you guys would agree. I mean, this knight's perfectly centralized, hitting a lot of key squares, f4, e3, c3 as well. This bishop is kind of just sitting there. So this trade is not really something that black wants to do. But maybe he was scared of playing f5. But as it turns out, you'll see he wasn't scared of f5. Because... Okay. So, white should have probably taken with the queen, by the way. Or actually, sorry, let me rephrase that. What should white do here? What should white take back with is what I mean to ask. I shouldn't gloss over this because this is important. And why? So is it more important to have the E file open or the F file open? So it's more important to have the E file open. So what should we take with? The queen or the pawn? Which one is better? Yeah, but e6 weakens the dark squares swish. It's not a move you want to play ever. But actually you're all wrong because the answer is you don't recapture either way. You play knight e4. This is actually important. So the reason you play knight e4 first is because it gains an important tempo. You want to move this knight to e4 anyway. And if you recapture the knight immediately, black can play f5 on the following move. But here, after knight e4, okay, queen has to go someplace. I'm not even exactly sure where. Queen, I don't know, e5 or something. But now after queen takes e3, all of a sudden, how do you defend this pawn? It seems rather difficult. So don't necessarily assume that a recapture is automatic because this knight e4 move would have actually posed black some big problems because now we're playing queen takes e3 with a gain of tempo. I'm not exactly sure what black does here. I mean, c4 seems really bad, but maybe it's necessary. But okay. So anyway, I just wanted to stress that point. Okay, but anyway, he took with the wrong way in any case. He took with the pawn. He should have taken with the queen, if not knight e4. So again, here f5 would be called for to stop knight e4. Okay, so rook d8, rook d1, and so f5 again. Yay! Okay, so he played f5 finally, and it's actually good here. It would have been better the last couple of moves, but okay, better late than never. So d4. Okay, take, and now what should black play here? This is really the key moment of the game right here. Because the first couple things, you know, were slight improvements, nothing that was too major. But this is really important because after the move that black plays compared to the move he should have played, he could have been just better, and instead he just got a very bad position. So yeah, it seems kind of obvious, but remember what I was talking about a couple of minutes ago when I said about this backward pawn on e7 when white had a pawn on d4, and how we want to eliminate this if possible with a move like e5. So if we don't play a move like e5 now, the problem is that white can kind of develop a firm grip on this square and make this pawn permanently weak. So e5 is important and necessary and correct. So he should have played e5. And it makes sense positionally just to get rid of their backward pawn, challenge the center, and open up, you know, open up the diagonal for this bishop, open up squares for the knight, open up the rook, file for the rook. I mean, there's really no reason not to play this move because, I mean, we're hitting the square, what, 5 times? That's a lot of times to hit a square. So that move would have been good. But okay, he instead played e6, which is a big problem. Because now this pawn becomes a permanent target on e6. Don't forget, now it's on the same color as this bishop. So this seems like a big problem. What was your line? 94, knight c2? 94, knight c2, knight d6, knight a1? No, this is terrible. Because I get my knight out and your knight is trapped. I just play knight e4 again and your knight's trapped. So you just down a queen for a rook. Not good. Okay, but anyway. So yeah. E5 was necessary. E6 now it creates a weakness. But okay, let's see what happens. So knight f3. Okay, now the problem is e5 doesn't quite work. Because if e5, take, queen c5 check forced, or else you just lose a pawn. Queen f2, check. King f2, knight e5, bishop b3, check. King h8, knight d4. And this is probably better for white because maybe knight e6 is coming. Maybe rook fe1 is coming. I mean, it's still playable, but it would have definitely been better to play the move before. Okay, so rook e8 instead, rook e1. Okay, now what should black try to do maybe? I mean, his position's already a bit difficult, but what's a possible idea for him here? So what's black's worst piece at the moment? Yeah, the knight. So is there a way we can maybe activate it a bit? Yeah, it's the knight. So yeah, potential idea might be to go... Well, actually not knight e7, d5, because I'm not even sure what it does on d5, but maybe knight a5 to c4. Try to weaken this pawn phalanx. You always want to attack a pawn chain at its base. So maybe knight a5, c4, and then force b3, and then maybe bring it back to d5, attack c3. Yeah. So knight a5, knight c4 was a good idea. Okay, but okay, queen e7. Okay, so now the question is, can white play this move? Yes or no? What do you guys think? Yeah. So it turns out he can, but it actually kind of by force ends up being an opposite color bishop ending. So it's actually playable, but I don't know if it's even best. Because what happens is, okay, take, this Check. Is all force, by the way. So take, and the point is bishop e3, winning the rook back. So rook d6, forced, knight g5, knight d8, forced, rook e1, king f8, take,
check,
take. And okay, white's up a pawn, but opposite color bishop ending, who knows? Who knows if white can actually win this? So by playing queen takes e6, he kind of just goes into this endgame. So it's playable, but I don't know if it's best. Yeah, so it's probably a draw. But I mean, white can have chances. Yeah, it's hard to say. But okay, I mean, white just played bishop b3 first, which makes sense too. So rook d6, a3, king h8 to get out of the pin. Okay, queen f2, and now the move we've been longing to play ever since we played e6 is yeah, and better late than never. Better late than never. It's kind of the motto of this game. Okay, so d5, knight a5. Okay, good. Knight c4, good. Okay, queen c5. Okay. So, what do you guys think white should play here? Oh, sorry, what should black play here? Did I say white? I meant black. What should black play here? So we want to kind of do a couple of things here. We want to kind of get our queen off of this pin, because notice that e4 doesn't actually threaten anything. We also want to kind of put pressure on this pawn. This pawn's a goner, but we have some very strong central pawns. So it turns out the best move here for black is queen d8. It looks a bit awkward, but the idea is we're keeping pressure on this diagonal, we're getting off of this file, we're putting pressure on this pawn, and if white takes on c4, then, for example, e4, queen a4. So the point of queen a4 is that if we take here, then rook takes e8 wins. So it's keeping this pawn pinned. But after rook f8, knight d4, rook d5, queen a6, bishop d4,
Check.
c d4, rook d4. So here black's better, because we can, at some point, this queen will have to move, and then we'll play moves like queen b6 and rook f d8 and pressure this pawn. And this pawn is actually closest to queening. So it's probably good for black. But okay, so black played rook b8, trying to attack b2, rook d2. And here a move e4 would be strong. So for example, e4, knight d4, bishop h6 to hit the rook, knight c6, fork, queen c7, pin, queen d4, king g8, knight b8, bishop d2, queen d2, queen b8. And again, here black's better because this pawn is weak, as is this pawn. Okay. So anyway, rook b5. Okay, and now this is probably drawish. For example, queen c8, check, rook d8, queen a6, rook b d5, rook d5, rook d5. If queen c4, then queen d7, and even though white has 3 passed pawns on the queen side, black has the d file, and this pawn's coming to e4 soon. And so black has good pressure. And this should actually probably be slightly better for black again. Because it's actually hard to push these pawns without making them weak, because this bishop's going to get opened up eventually. But okay, so instead, white played queen c4, then e4 was good. Check. Queen c8, queen d8, fine. Check. Take, knight g5. Okay. So now, a simple question. How should we capture this pawn? Pretty simple. So the answer is, of course, to take with the b rook, because we have to keep control of this d file. So the problem with rook d5 is that you lose control of the d file because of rook e d1, and now black is actually in some trouble. But with rook b d5, we simply keep control of the d file, and black is almost close to winning here. Because we have a superior minor piece, this bishop is better than this knight, and we have full control of the d file now. Notice that knight f7 doesn't work. We just play king g8. If he takes on d8, we take on d2, and we're winning. If he takes on d5, we take on d5, and again, we're winning, because this knight's actually trapped. So for example, take, the knight's trapped now, because that has no squares. So simple, rook b d5 just wins. But unfortunately, black thought that he had to take with the d rook and played rook d d5. And now the problem is, after rook e d1 as played, like I said, now the d file is white's. So after take, bishop f6. If white just plays knight e6, you know, white really can't be worse. Check. But knight f7 instead, and now black is actually winning, because after king g8, this knight again is trapped. The knight again is trapped. And so rook d7 is forced here, after which I can simply take on b2. But knight d6, and now black to move and win. Anybody? No, it's pretty simple. So, yeah, simply e3, as was played in the game. So e3, and now it's pretty much over. Rook e2, rook d5, knight c4, rook d1 check, king h2, f4, and this is over. This pawn is way too strong. Okay, so let's go back and see what happened in the game. Like I said, black played e3. So e3, rook e2, rook d5, all good. Knight c4. Okay, so now this is an important point that black missed. What's up, Source? And the important point is to play this move first, rook d1. The idea is we want to keep this king as far away from the pawn as possible. And by playing rook d1, it forces king h2. And that's an important finesse. Because after the move that black played, which is f4, now on king f1, which is what he should have played, rook d1, check. Rook e1, now he can play rook e1 and get his king to f3. But if we play rook d1 first, now his king is going to have a hard time coming to f3. But okay. So anyway, f4, g5. Okay, so now black's move and win again. And again, our hero found the move. So it couldn't have been too difficult. So we simply pin this pawn with rook g5, and now we just win a pawn. Yeah. So g4, h5, knight d6. Okay, and now how do we finish the game? So simply h takes g5, and if knight e4, just g takes h3.
Check.
Knight takes g5, bishop takes g5, and this should be completely winning. These 4 pawns and the bishop should be more than enough for the rook. So this is completely hopeless. But I'm not sure why black was scared of that. I guess he was scared of knight e4 or something, I don't know, but he played rook e5. And now the problem is this king can suddenly come to, whoops. The king can come to f3, and now white's kind of battling again. Okay, so rook e6, okay. So now, what should black try to do here? So now the plan needs to be to activate the rook. And so where should the rook be activated to? Well, it needs to be activated to target the weakness. And white's weakness is this pawn on g4. So the right move here is to play g5. The idea is to simply move this bishop and to play rook h6 and rook h4 and win this pawn. And notice that king f3 doesn't save the pawn because of rook h3, rook g3, rook g4. So he needed to activate the rook to h6 by playing g5. It also helps defend this pawn as well. But getting the rook to the h file is the key, because getting the rook to d file actually doesn't do anything. But yeah, you can't really play rook e7 though, because I always have king f3 at the end. And then my knight gets in. So yeah, if you play rook e7 first, I can play knight d6, and then on rook h7, I can play king f3, because now if you play g5, now I have knight f5, and now you can't ever win this pawn, and my king has e4. So doesn't quite work. But okay, so rook b6, knight c5, bishop b5, king f3, rook e6, knight e4, rook d8, play some moves. Okay, so this is probably drawish now. For example, knight g5, check. King f6, knight e4, king e7, knight c5, rook h3, check. King e4, bishop d6, knight d3, rook g3, c5, bishop b8, a4, rook g4, b5, ab5, ab5, whoops, g5, b6, g1, c6, king d6, c7. So this is probably a draw. I take on c7 and then you take on f4. And this is probably just a draw. Okay, but g5. And now black wins. So how does black win here? Okay, so rook check, king g4, and then what? Okay, so rook check. Check. Notice that king g4 is forced. Because of king g2, then f3 wins. Check. Because take, and then I queen. So after rook h3, you have to play king g4, and then what wins? f3? Nope. Nope. f3 loses. That's what was played in the game. f3 loses. You'll see why. But simply rook h1 is the way to win. So the idea is you just simply want to play rook h1, rook f1, bishop d4, and then f3. And there's really nothing white can do to stop that. But black was in time pressure and panicked and played f3. And now white just wins. Rook takes e3, rook takes h3. And now check. Rook f3. We got a little fork. And so now white is winning. Just up 2 pawns. Check. So take, b5, check, c5, and yeah. So here, black resigned. But he had his chances. And he was playing someone several hundred points stronger, so it was a good effort, I thought. But a couple of times he was just not as precise as he should have been. And that made the difference. Okay, let's go to the next one. Okay. Okay, so we got a normal opening of sorts. Okay. What were the ratings? White was like, or sorry, black was like 1800-ish, and white was like 1200 to 1300-ish. Or I think white was actually even stronger. He might have been close to 2000. I forget exactly. Okay, so what should white do here? So the idea of this move c6 is to probably play this move b5. So it might not hurt to throw an a4 just to kind of stop b5, also give a bishop the square a2. But the move played was fine. Yeah, and d4 was fine. But a4 might have been just a little classier. Okay, so b5. Okay, so now where does the bishop have to go back to? So the bishop has to go back to d3. Because of bishop e2, then b4 forces e5 with de5, oops, de5, de5, bc3. This is equal. So you have to stay on this pawn with bishop d3, so that when you play b4, I can play knight e2 and not have to worry about the pawn. Because otherwise, if bishop e2, b4, if you play like knight b1 or something, now on h6 you have to play bishop takes f6. Because if you don't, I'm going to play g5 and then take on e4. And so you don't really want to play bishop takes f6. Okay, so anyway, bishop d3 was correct, but he played bishop e2, and now b4 would have been strong. It just kind of equalizes, basically, because, again, white would have to go for that e5. But a5, which is kind of weird. And so, how can we stop b4 here? Yeah, so we can actually just play a3 here. But the point is, if b4 take, and then you can't take back because the rook is hanging. But the move that white played was okay too. White played e5, so he's trying to exploit the fact that this is pinned. And now what must black do to avoid losing a piece? No, h6 loses a piece. h6, I just take on f6. And then if you take, I take. I just win a piece. Now only one thing. You have to take, 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 and then just knight d5. Yeah. So he has to take and then take on d1 to remove the pin. Knight d7, of course, hangs the queen. So, but black instead played knight bd7, which I don't understand, because free piece. Okay, so free piece. Okay, so white's just up a piece now. Okay, so what should white play here, being that he's up a piece? Well, initiating exchanges when you're up a piece is good. So I move like knight e4. Just trying to trade everything because this knight is pinned, so we're just going to try to trade two sets of pieces on f6. Or we could keep the pin even, because it's not like black can ever play h6, right? Because of h6, I just take and then take, and just win another pawn. So I can kind of keep this pin permanently unless, you know, black decides to play d5, and then I can take, and then I get this e5 square for my knight, and this bishop is also quite bad. So knight e4 would have been good, but he played a3, which is fine. Rook a7, queen d2 is fine, queen b6, queen f4 is fine, attacking the knight. Okay, knight e8. Okay, now what should white play here? Does black have a threat here? Does black have a threat? Yeah, so black does have a threat. So the threat is to actually play f6. So for example, if you play rook e1, f6. And the point is if bishop h6, then g5 wins a piece. And if bishop h4, then again g5 is a fork. Okay, so there is a threat actually, f6. So in this position, white should play bishop h6, just to offer a trade. and to also kind of extricate his bishop before f6 and g5 come. Okay, but instead white plays knight e4, and now the problem is he's actually losing a piece because of f6 and g5. This move doesn't stop it. Even though he's on g5 like 500 times, he's still going to have to sacrifice a piece for it. Okay, so black, I don't know why he defended this. He should have played f6 and g5. But okay, again, bishop h6 would have been good, because now you actually have some mating attack. You know, bishop h6, queen h4, knight fg5. Try to mate on h7 maybe. But bc3, not a good move, because f6 again, and now he saw it. Bishop h6, g5. Okay, so what must white play here? Because, I mean, he's still doing fine, because, remember, he won a piece for a pawn before, so if he can get 2 pawns for his piece back, he'll still be up a pawn. But what white did wasn't best, because white took the pawn with a knight. And the problem is now he's losing 2 pieces, because I take this one on h6, and now this one's lost as well, because it's pinned. So unfortunately, white lost 2 pieces. He should have simply played take, take, and take, and just been up a pawn. Knight takes f6.
Check.
I can play rook takes f6. This is no good. Because now queen g5, I play rook h6. And now again, you're losing 2 pieces. So the only way to save a piece and get something back is to play bishop g5. So if either knight g5, then bishop h6. Okay, so knight g5, h4, and now black has successfully won 2 pieces. Okay, so queen g4, rook g7. Okay, take, d5, queen h5, so now unpinning the queen so he can take the bishop. Okay, which he does. Okay, moving the queen away from attack. Okay, taking a pawn. Okay, so here black should probably just take this to get rid of this guy, because he's a little bit of a pest on g5. But instead, black plays this move, rook f7. And now what should white do? Yep. So unfortunately for black, he's lined his rooks up on this diagonal, which white has access to with bishop h5. So after this bishop h5 and winning the exchange, it should be roughly equal, because white will be up 2 pawns and a rook for 2 pieces. And this pawn is weak, so white's probably slightly better, but, you know, it's not the end of the world. Okay, so bishop h5 is what he played. Good. Rook g5.
Check.
Take, take. Rook e1, good. d5, good. Rook d1. Threatening some stuff.
Check.
Queen takes forced. Okay. So what should white play here? This is an important point in determining whose pieces are better. So basically the question is, should white trade queens or not? And the answer is that white should not trade queens. Because notice, whose king is safer here? Whose king is safer here, whites or blacks? Well, this guy really has no pawns around him. At least this guy has pawns around him. Yeah. So because white's king is safer, he should want to try to keep the queens on. So queen to f3 makes sense. You're hitting this guy, pinning the knight, and also getting ready to play rook fe1. So rook fe1 not as good, because then black can actually trade queens. But by removing the queen from attack, and also by creating a threat, Notice that queen h6 actually doesn't do anything because after g3, I can cover that square. g4 might be a bit much, but g3, and then it's hard for black to actually find a move here. Okay, but anyway, so he actually took. Okay, and here what should white do? So notice that g4 doesn't actually win anything because of rook g5 and the pawn is pinned. So g4 is not the move you want to play. So we really want to get this guy out is the point. So a move like rook d8. Notice that rook d2 is kind of passive. Rook d3 runs into bishop c4. Rook d4, rook d5, rook d6, rook d7 are all covered, but rook d8 and rook fd1, or rook fe1. Probably rook fd1 though, because on the e file there's really no feature for the rook. Would have been good, but instead white played g3. But the problem with g3 is that all of a sudden his light squares are looking very weak. And if all of a sudden this bishop manages to get onto this diagonal, there's a mate on h1. So g3 was not a good move. There's no need to push the pawns in front of the king. But okay, rook g5, king g2. And now black's simply better if he just plays this, this, and this, because his king is stuck. So h5, and now h4 just wins material because you can't defend g3. So after h4, the only thing defending g3 is the rook, but after c4, the rook has to move off.
Check.
So knight h4 instead, then knight g6, some fancy footwork. And now white is starting f5, so this rook has to stay on this 5th rank. Either rook f5 to block it or rook d5 to trade rooks. Either one is fine. But instead he played rook g4, and now white wins with f5, fork. Whoops. Yeah, so pawn fork. Bishop c4, but unfortunately
Check.
it's check. So white thought, or black thought he was being clever, but it's check. So after take, check. And now threatening actually rook e5 mate, which is cute. So king f5, king h3. And now one little finesse, what should white play here? I mean, he's completely winning, but there's actually a cute move that white has here. So notice that if white simply plays rook c6, he just wins this pawn, because his king is actually stalemated, it has no moves. And so you can, probably trade rooks after rook takes pawn, and then it's pretty much over. So rook c6 would have been good, but he played rook d8 instead, which worked out even better, because after bishop e6, now white to move and win. Yep. So rook f8.
Check.
So black only has 2 legal moves. This one or this one. If he plays king g6, rook takes e6 wins the bishop. If he plays bishop f7, rook takes f7 wins the bishop. So this would have won the bishop. But he played king h4.
Check.
And king h5. Trying to get himself mated, but nah, he's fine. And now white actually has mate in 2. You guys see mate in 2? Seems awkward that there's a mate in 2 here, but simply, yeah. So white played rook f8.
Check. Check.
7.
Checkmate.
And mate. Yay. So white won. A little bit of back and forth though, because he was up a piece by move 12. Yep, by move 12. And then he was down a piece by move 18, so. But he battled back. He found some good moves and managed to win. So that's it for Patzer's Playground episode 27.